As Mishva panned through the marketplace, I watched in awe. On the narrow dirt streets, I could see footprints of bare feet. Little ones, perhaps left by a child who had run home after playing. And larger ones, perhaps from a mother, carrying the fresh spices she had purchased at a nearby stand in a small brown pouch. Or maybe a girl, not so different from myself, walking the streets of her home. On my left and right, I could see row after row of shops filled with spices. I could almost smell the sharp scent of the red spice that filled the barrel to my left. It was overflowing in its container. It seemed almost as if a gust of wind would whisk away the powder with little effort, perhaps the missing ingredient to a lunchtime meal. Although I'm not so sure the shop clerk would allow the wind to be such a thief, as he stood protectively by his barrels, eyes narrowed defensively, brows furrowed. My eyes started to burn from the force of keeping them open, but I didn't want to miss a moment. I didn't want to miss a step along our path. The colors of the shirts that hung in the shops are ones I had never seen before. Not the manufactured, mass-produced clothing colors of the shirts that adorned the racks of my local Target, but ones that would blend with nature if placed beside it. Greens that reflected the photosynthesis that should be occurring within its leaves. Blues that reflected the water glistening outside my window. Reds that matched the spice sitting directly across from it, each seemingly ground from the same plant. When we moved outside of the marketplace, I realized just how small it was. In my mind, I had experienced the whole of a country that is roughly 390,000 square miles, based on how many new experiences I had just encountered. In reality, I had only encountered square meters of a country that would be nothing more than a speck on a map, if it weren't for my new friends, if it weren't for the experiment digital. I assume you're all probably very confused. This was a tiny village in Egypt, which I experienced through my computer screen while on a several-hour-long Zoom call this past fall. It was part of the Experiment Digital, a program for youth in the Middle East, North Africa, and the US to foster leadership and community service skills, while also meeting like-minded youth from other countries. But my journey did not begin there. It truthfully has been ongoing for many, many years. What journey, you may ask? This is my journey to self-discovery and understanding, which has placed me where I am today, in front of you all. The story I just told you was but a brief moment in the scope of my life's journey. Only a few familiar faces amongst the thousands that have shaped me, that have set me on a path to create change in the world. Change that begins with understanding and ends in acceptance, the mission of my organization. The story I just shared with you at the beginning of this talk was during a virtual homestay experience, a part of the Experiment Digital in which you are paired with students from a different country so that you can engage in a dialogue and a sharing of cultures. My virtual homestay was with two incredible young women from Egypt, both age 16. They walked me around their village, holding up their smartphones so that Zoom would capture the familiar faces and buildings that had become familiar to them. Looking back, it's truly incredible. I sat in my own familiar surroundings, watching as a completely new world unfolded before my eyes. I never truly understood what it meant to understand before the Zoom call, because I had never encountered something with which I wasn't at least a bit familiar. But in that Zoom call, on the other side of a phone screen, I saw things so beautiful that could not have been imagined. Beauty that can only come from experience. I want to pause now and bring you back to the very first day that I opened my application for the Experiment Digital. It was a normal Wednesday during the month of April, 2020. I had my laptop open after a long day of Zoom classes, which had quickly become the norm, and I was checking my emails. I saw one from Dr. Bonneau, and I decided to open it. I didn't know what it contained, but I never leave an email unread. It said, the Experiment Digital, a virtual international exchange program for youth. Through this program, hundreds of students across the US connect with students from Algeria and Iraq and Yemen and Egypt and other countries in the Middle East and North Africa to discuss such topics as citizenship, leadership, community initiatives, and public narrative, with an end goal of creating a community service project. It's supported by the Stevens Initiative, which is supported by the US Department of State. Now, we had just entered into the COVID-19 lockdown and we're lacking those person-to-person contacts that we usually had. I decided I would apply since all of my summer plans had been canceled. And I quickly realized that speaking with the inanimate objects on my desk wasn't exactly fostering quality communication skills. But I still put off completing the application. I remember reopening it the night it was due and dedicated about 2 hours to it. I remember clicking the submit button and then completely forgetting about it. About a month later, I received an email that I had been admitted to the Experiment Digital. I remember this great flood of relief that I would have something to do over the summer. Looking back, it's quite ironic. I put very little effort into something that would ultimately change my life. The greatest lesson I learned from this, and have continuously preached once I realized this, is that we must take advantage of the opportunities that come our way, or else we just might miss out on something that would become a foundational piece in our life story. While the Experiment Digital Youth Leadership and Community Service Program is centered around just that, leadership and community service, it really fosters understanding of different cultures, different foods, different languages, different countries, and ourselves. One of my greatest takeaways from the program hasn't been leadership, or even the idea for my organization, but rather a lesson, one I would carry with me from that day forward. Throughout my life, it has been easy to insert myself into a bubble, thinking that my small town and my small world within it were the extent of this wide world. What I realized is that no matter how small your world is, or your world becomes, there will always be something out there far greater than you. The stories that were shared with me from these students from completely different countries allowed me to make this realization. The little I knew about their country was based on what I had heard in the news or learned in class about the wars they had fought or the gender-based violence they had experienced. The people of those countries I knew as statistics, as points of reference to tragedy or hardship. So I learned. I strove to know each person, their names, their faces, their stories, what they loved about their home. Because after all, each country that we see is nothing more than a speck on a map, is the foundation upon which someone has created their life. Let me ask you a question. This is something that I've continuously pondered over these past few months. How can you possibly begin to understand the people in the world around you if you do not first understand yourself? But in that same lens, how can you learn more about yourself by learning about others? I'm going to challenge you today. I want you to go out and discover other people's cultures, their languages, histories, passions, because the first step to acceptance, outward and inward, is understanding. Coming to this realization has allowed me to see the world in a far more vivid way. I've used my new way of seeing things to understand my own identity, and I have learned a very key thing. While I am from a completely different part of the world than my friends from Egypt and Yemen and Iraq, we're all the same because we all have an identity. And while that identity in itself is completely different from everyone else, we are all on a path to discovery of the world around us and of ourselves. We are all multifaceted. My organization, Positive I, aims to spread this understanding. The I in Positive I is for identity, which has played a key role in my understanding, and I believe is pivotal to this idea of worldwide understanding that will eventually lead to acceptance. The work I have done thus far has pertained to my podcast, the Positive I podcast, where I share the unique voices of many different people, for they share their journeys to understanding certain facets of their own identity, which has helped them find a better outlook on the world. My story has spanned over miles and miles, the terrain made up of rough, coarse sand that I have dragged my feet through. But you know what keeps me going? A speck, barely visible in the distance. That speck is the promise of a future filled with acceptance and understanding. The beauty of identity is that it's not stagnant, but changing and evolving and reforming constantly. With each new face that comes into our lives, with each new understanding of a different culture and country that we have never encountered before, with each new voice that shares its path, we are evolving, we are growing, we are accepting. Thank you.